This is episode 113 of the Trauma Coaching for Latter-day Saints podcast, Why You Don't or Can't Speak Up. I'm your host, Anita Bremer. I'm a Latter-day Saint mom with a history of trauma. I use my own life experience and spiritual gifts, as well as mindset and somatic tools to help you trade ashes for beauty and end generational trauma. Let's talk about what it takes to truly heal and find lasting joy from the perspective of your nervous systems. Okay, so it's January. Did you guys stop and realize this? We're almost to the end of January, in fact. And I don't know about you, but I feel kind of blah and sluggish. And I just haven't really fully been ready to start 2023. I'm recording this on a Saturday morning. My husband and son are off at Young Men's basketball. My daughter is still sleeping. And I'm in my pajamas. I haven't showered. I haven't done anything. I haven't even eaten yet because I needed to come record this podcast and the house is quiet. And I realized that January feels like a sleepy Saturday morning. It might not help that I stayed out at book club till after midnight last night. So, and I'm really trying to work on my sleep and like consistent wake up and going to bed times. So I did myself a disservice, but the way I'm feeling is kind of like almost like hungover, foggy headed, sluggish, looking around my house, realizing that chores need to be done. Things are kind of yucky. That's how January feels to me. It is gray and monotonous, and there's pressure for, creating your goals and making this your year. And I'm just like, ugh. So if you feel similarly, I am just here to tell you that you are normal. It's fine. And I sent this out to my email list last night. I have challenged myself to be the least productive I can be this year. And I don't mean that I just want to like lay around and do nothing, but my whole life, and this might resonate with you, I have been focused on how do I be productive? How do I be productive? How can I get more done? And it's kind of like my value has been wrapped up in my productivity. And I'm tired of that. And so obviously, I've been a coach for over 4 years, and I logically know that my value does not depend on my productivity. And so I've kind of challenged myself. This isn't an explicit challenge. It's not on my goals list, which, by the way, I've been a resolution maker my entire life. Now I use the new year. The new year always does feel like a fresh start, but this year it seems like it's just lagging behind. I'm going to call February 1st my new year. Um, so I do set goals for myself, but in the past, I have set these goals because I want to be productive so that I can feel valuable and worthy, right? So now the reason why I set goals has shifted. It's not so that I can feel valuable and worthy. It's just to kind of keep me focused, keep me on track for what I have decided I want in my life. So I've set a couple goals, one business goal, one personal goal. And then this like be as how do you say this? The least productive as you can be. It's sort of a bonus goal, right? It's just something in the back of my mind that I'm not just going to sit around doing nothing. I don't particularly love watching TV or watching movies. I'm going to still be active and taking action, but I don't want it to be for the sake of being productive, right? So there's a fine distinction there. I want it to be because it lights me up, right? So if I have an idea and I'm just like, I really feel like doing fill in the blank, then I want to do that. And that will be quote unquote productive, but not so that I can chase my own value and worthiness, right? I want to have this goal of being the least productive as possible so that I'm really focusing on things I want to do, things that light me up, things that give me purpose, right? All of that. And I invite you along. If you want to join me in a more focused and intentional way, come join my new group coaching program. It's called Presence. So, learning the skills of being present are going to be sort of our main focus, but there's going to be, nervous system regulation that we talk about here on the podcast, somatic exercises, meditation. Of course, I'm trained in mindset, so that will come to play. And it'll just be a really safe, co creative space. And so you can come and be intentional and get coached and just put into practice some of the things that we talk about here on the podcast. And I think one of the byproducts will be, let's turn the dial down on productivity for the sake of productivity, and let's turn the dial up on doing what lights you up, right? Because you desire it, because it exacerbates the you-ness of you in the world, right? So, of course, you're going to take actions. You're going to, quote unquote, be productive, but that's not going to be the focus, right? So, that's kind of my rambly introduction for today. I want to try something. I am finding that I'm in a season, maybe it's the January funk, that I still feel drawn to podcasting and I have all these ideas, but then when it comes time to actually sit down and record and write up the notes and all of that, I'm like, And so I want to try doing some shorter episodes that have just kind of one powerful punch in them. And so today I'm hoping will be that. And I entitled this episode, Why You Don't or Can't Speak Up. It is a trademark, a hallmark of people that have experienced trauma. Doesn't mean that, you might not have much trauma in your past and you might still struggle with this. So it's not like it's, for sure, if you struggle with this, then you probably have trauma. But it is something that all of my clients that I'm working with on trauma, they all tend to struggle with this idea of like, I want to speak up, but in the moment I can't. And I want to just address that. Now, as I was preparing this episode, I thought, have I mentioned this? It feels like I've mentioned this, but I can't, I went back through my episodes and I wasn't sure if I had mentioned this or not, or if I had just simply thought about mentioning it. But regardless, even if this is a repeat, this is an important element. This is something that kind of gave me one of those mind blowing moments, right? Just like that. Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense, right? And so even if I am repeating myself, I'm okay with that because I think more and more people need to hear this. I want to start with reviewing the freeze response and just reviewing kind of nervous system states in general. So remember, when you perceive a threat, and it doesn't have to be a real threat, it could just simply be a perceived threat. Your body is going to come online. It's going to shoot a bunch of adrenaline and cortisol into your body, right? To get you moving, to get you away from the threat. So I always think of it as like the first response is to run away. And that if you can't run away, can't get away from it, the second response is to fight it, right? Now, what happens if you can't run away and you can't fight it? Like maybe the threat is too large. So your body automatically assesses that you're not going to be able to win that fight. The third response is the freeze response. And one thing I really want to say is that I know we get frustrated with being in the freeze response. I know I have been frustrated myself with I just want to not be frozen all the time. I want to not feel this way, right? But when I remind myself that the freeze response is an adaptive response to keep me alive, it helps me feel some compassion and gratitude for my body, right? So by and large, our bodies are always working for us. They're working in our favor to keep us alive, no matter the cost, right? So, one example I recently heard is that an animal in the wild, if it gets a leg caught in a trap, it will gnaw off that foot or that leg in order to get away and to keep itself alive. Interesting, right? I did not know that until very recently. So we might look at some what we might call symptoms, right? Like, well, how is my body, the IBS that I have, how is that working for me? So the symptoms themselves might not seem like they're working for you, but if you zoom out and look at how your body is working to keep you safe and keep you alive, then your body is generally always working for you. I say generally because I really try to avoid extremes and black and whites. So I'm not like, I don't have all of the education in any one area. So I don't know. There might be certain situations where that is not true, but I think overall it is true. The freeze response keeps us alive because remember, if you have a threat, a danger coming at you, and you can't fight it, if you were to continue fighting it, you might get more hurt or you might die sooner, right? And so the freeze response really is such a beautiful, wonderful way that our body is working for us. Now, within that freeze response, once we get into the freeze response, there's a couple of telltale signs that we're in freeze. One of them is kind of a dissociation, like foggy minded, just bumbling around, sort of like being in that robot mode. That could be a form of dissociation, which happens in the freeze response. Heightened body sensations or numbed body sensations, right? So I know when we're talking about trauma, it sometimes feels like, well, that could be anything. But these body sensations, like if you think of freeze response, it's like literally freezing, making the cells in your body more rigid, which affects how you actually feel the sensations in your body. But the one I really want to focus on today is this idea of automatic obedience, also known as the fawn response. So if you go back to my earlier episode about the fawn response, I kind of described it as, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Like they're all four separate responses. But since I recorded that episode, and I'll drop it in the show notes because I don't remember the number of the episode, I have learned more. And now I have learned that fawning or that automatic obedience is actually kind of a subset of the freeze response. It's part of what happens when we go into the freeze response. So I want to use an example of rape or sexual assault. I should have put a trigger warning on this one because it's just such a clear example. Okay. So if someone were to attack you, many of us have had this experience in our past, and you can't run away, you can't fight, they've overpowered you in some way, then your body is going to go into this freeze response because that's the next adaptive response. And in that freeze response, you most likely will go into automatic obedience, just like go along, do whatever they want, this get through this, right? And when that happens, speaking up or saying no or fighting back is no longer available. It's no longer available in a biological, physiological way. That like blew my mind. I was like, oh my gosh, this is why so many women, and possibly men as well, but in particular, women who are sexually assaulted, and people ask them, well, why didn't you fight him off? Why didn't you say no? Right. They feel shame. They're like, I don't know. And they don't have an explanation for it. This is the explanation. And I'm like, why do more people not know about this? This is the explanation because your body is literally sending you signals to just go along, to get along, to get out of this, to, end it faster, right? Sometimes that is the adaptive response. So when I think about people who have been sexually assaulted and maybe they go through, an investigation or a trial or whatever, I just want to scream like the reason why you didn't fight off or say no, right? Because sometimes we don't fight and we kind of just go along because maybe we're primed for that freeze response. And then the perpetrator, the attacker is like, well, they didn't say no, right? Which now we have all these conversations about consent. Somebody not saying no doesn't mean yes, right? But for the victim, and especially when they're being questioned, like, did you say no? Why didn't you say no? Why didn't you speak up? Why didn't you say, I feel uncomfortable or whatever it is? And they don't have an explanation. It's because your body has taken over, because you don't feel safe, right? So shame becomes such an important part of this equation because then after the fact, then we heap all this shame on ourselves. We speak to ourselves harshly. We're like, why didn't next time I should have done this. I should have said this. And this is where like all the ideas of what we should say, right, come up. I totally feel this way. Like after the fact, after the heightened emotion, and I've come down from it, then I have all the responses, right? And then I'm like, oh, I suck. I'm terrible. Like, why couldn't I just say that in the moment, right? But I really want you to hear in the moment when it feels unsafe or feels like a threat in some way, it's not available to say no. Like, no isn't even an option. Isn't that amazing? It's just like crazy. So, what about people pleasing or like our mindset? Because sometimes, if say you have social anxiety and you go into a situation where you're around a lot of people, it could be just sort of your thoughts about the situation, about yourself, about the people, about what they think about you, right? That is the trigger. But what I want to point out about this is that how does it feel when you're in a social situation and you're like, yeah, I don't think this is trauma. It's not like unsafe necessarily. It doesn't feel like a threat, right? Like when I'm hanging out with my girlfriends, but then in my head, I'm like, oh, should I say this? Should I not say this? And I have this whole conversation with myself about what I should say. And then I don't end up ever saying anything because then the conversation passes by. Yes, that is like a mindset thing, right? It's happening in your mind. There's all these thoughts going ping ponging around in your mind. But what I want to offer as a possibility is that anxiety, the mind chatter that happens is a response to something that happens in your body. So after the fact, you can say, well, logically, it wasn't a threat. I didn't feel unsafe, right? But your body kind of has a mind of its own. Like it literally has brain cells in your heart and in your gut. So it could just be taking over for you. So logically, after the fact, when you think about it and you replay it, you might be putting on that situation that happened in the past. Oh, yeah, no, I was totally safe. But I want you to really get in that moment or in the future when this happens, really pay attention. How does my body feel? Does my body feel rigid and tight and unsure and tentative? If you have had an experience in your past that put you into the freeze response, you're going to be more likely in the future to go into that freeze response sooner, right? Because our brains are always scanning the environment, assessing the situation for, what is safe, what's not safe. And if your brain assesses the situation of like, oh, that's like this time that this happened, then we're just going to automatically go down that path. So if a freeze response is part of that path, you might jump straight to that freeze response, right? Because your body's like, well, let's conserve energy. Let's not think about running away or fighting this. Let's just go straight there. Efficiency, right? So how does it feel in your body? Right? Like we can argue, oh, yeah, that's just mindset. it's, logically, I felt fine, I felt safe. But if you feel rigid or tense or frozen in any way in your body, then I would suggest that that's at least partially a freeze response, which then maybe will shut down the availability for you to speak up or to say no, right? Or to just speak your mind. So it's just a really fascinating thing to think about. Okay, I think that is it. That was way longer than I thought. That was not the short, punchy episode. I guess I had more words for that, but I will work on being more concise and being direct and just leaving you with one powerful thought. For journaling, I just want you to think about times in your past when you felt like you couldn't speak up. What did that feel like in your body? Okay, if you want to work with me, the best way to work with me right now is by joining my group. And I didn't mention this earlier. We officially start February 1st is our first session. And I decided as I was working with my website team, I have a page on my website. You can go to danitabremmer.com/presence, PRESENCE, for all the details. And as I was putting that page together, it felt intuitively right. It felt aligned. And also thinking about my capacity and how January has felt for me, and just giving myself a little bit more space and time, it felt aligned to offer to you, anyone who signs up by March 31st and pays in full, you will become a lifetime member, a founding member. So the way this program is going to work, it's going to be like a membership, except when I think membership, I usually think of like hundreds or thousands of people. It's going to be much more intimate than that. It's going to be more into like a dozen, maybe 2 dozen people at a time. So you'll be able to pay monthly. It's $222 a month. Or if you pay in full for a whole year, it's $22.22. So that's 2 months discount, right? And if you join by March 31st and pay in full the whole year at once, then you become a lifetime member. So essentially, you pay for 1 year and you get lifetime access. What does lifetime access mean? Well, I sure hope that this program is something that I do for a long time, maybe for the rest of my life. But, we can't read the future. Maybe I'll get hit by a bus or something, and that won't be, an option, but at least 2 years, right? So I'm hoping that this program will be something I do long term for 5, 10, 20 years. But if not, I'm guaranteeing 2 years. And so then you would pay $22.22 for 2 years. So that's like $1,100 per year. I still think that is a steal. If I only decide to do the program for 2 years, which I'm pretty sure I won't, I'm pretty sure we'll do it much longer than that, then even for 2 years, for this kind of work, weekly coaching with me, somatic work, meditations, getting my brain on your situations and all the tools that I bring, that is like a fantabulous deal. So go to danitabremmer.com/presence to read more about the program and what it offers. Let me know if you have any questions. You can connect with me on Voxer. I'm at Danita Bremmer, or you can just click over to the contact tab on my website and send me a message that way. That's enough for now, and so are you. The impact I am making in the world grows best by word of mouth. Would you please share this episode with someone this week? And if you're ready to address your own trauma with my support privately, go to danitabremmer.com to schedule a free trauma assessment call. Until next time, go be yourself and follow the spirit.